So my name is Dr. John Fry. I'm well known for my academic research on Bitcoin, and I wanted to talk today about an introduction to FinTech. So my apologies if it looks like I'm reading from my notes. I'm afraid my auto cue machine is broken. So the first thing I wanted to talk about today is why finance is interesting. So essentially I think there's two important sides to this. The first is a softer human side. The second is a harder scientific, usually quantitative side, which is where I became interested in finance in the first place. Now you need both sides working in concert in order to finance to properly work as a subject. So FinTech is interesting, I think, in part because it's an offshoot of regular finance, but it is much more important than that. Okay, so FinTech is a genuinely multifaceted subject. It's bigger than any individual, even Elon Musk, and indeed it's bigger than any individual academic discipline. So as part of this, I think you can think of FinTech as like an academic decathlon, which in addition to being intrinsically interesting and important in its own right, can potentially pay you a lot of money if you do things correctly. So the purpose of our teaching within FinTech really is to try and prepare some of the technical managers of the future, and with this aim in mind, I wanted to go through one of the modules I've been teaching both this year and last year, and the outline of my module is shown on this slide there. Within this, there's really two things to look at. Firstly, FinTech is a multifaceted subject. Again, it's like an academic decathlon. Secondly, what we're really trying to do is train the technical managers of the future. The more people understand the subject, the more they understand the people that work in the area, the more likely they are to do a good job of management. Okay, it's not just about randomly plucking a techie from out of the ether somewhere. So one of the things to talk about in my module is R programming, statistics. So this is obviously interesting and important in its own right. I think it's important though to give people an exposure to computer programming. So sometimes people can find the extreme logic that's involved in this a bit eye-watering at first, but I think it's important to have an exposure to this. Students usually do well on this in the end, and again I think the important thing to emphasize here is that people would be better managers if they've had some exposure to computer programming and a part of the subject, and within that they can understand the people that work in the subject on the coal face. Remember I said about a mix of the soft human side and a harder scientific side. So one of the things that we talk about in my module is a big data application to the electricity industry, and this is significant because it is a genuine industrial application. It's interestingly important in its own right, but I think it's also useful to see these things in their natural habitat. And what we've got there is an example of a practical industrial problem where you've got to be as systematic as possible and you can't just use Excel. So for historical economics and finance then, on top of regular finance, FinTech is genuinely multifaceted. Again, it's like a sort of academic decathlon. And this historical perspective I think is very important. As you've seen in the last few days with Bitcoin and Elon Musk, some things associated with new technologies can change very, very quickly. A historical perspective, in contrast, is perhaps the only perspective that won't date so quickly. It'll have this timeless quality to it. I've seen firsthand how quickly things can change. So I had a prize-winning paper published on Bitcoin and Ripple, which were then the two biggest cryptocurrencies. In some ways this was career-defining, but within a week of the paper being accepted, Ethereum overtook Ripple as the second most highly capitalized cryptocurrency, so this thing could have gone either way. I could have easily been caught out by just how quickly the technology moves on. Okay, so just be aware of this, that technology can move very quickly and it can catch you out if you're not careful. So always look to the right bits of financial history. So within this, I think it's important to just quickly emphasize people have throughout history had the same evolutionary stable preferences as you've got for risk, return, reward, greed, etc. Also look for historical fads being variously associated with either new technologies or an influx of new non-traditional investors. Another thing we talk about on my module is blockchain. Again, blockchain is multifaceted and an academic decathlon in its own right. Now you can view in part blockchain as just being the technological gubbins behind Bitcoin, but it's potentially much deeper than that. So one of the things we go through are a set of rigorous decision-making criteria that can help to determine if a particular problem is soluble using a blockchain solution. So the point here would be that whilst blockchain undoubtedly has the potential for foundational societal change, there's certain problems within finance which a blockchain solution is not appropriate, if, for example, speed rather than absolute accuracy is the name of the game. So another thing I wanted to try and talk about in my module is the econometric modelling of cryptocurrency data. This is something I won a best paper prize for. Again, it's easy for me to say, it's interesting and important in its own right. It's potentially also a very rich topic to set for dissertation students, so I think the subject has a lot of value to it. Also a live topic of academic research, so it's very rare to be potentially so close to the cutting edge of academic research during MSc lectures. I've also included this material because I think it includes two important life lessons. Firstly, it's an easy example of a financial topic that's inherently numerical, and you have to look at numbers if you want to properly understand it. Secondly, I think it's relatively easy to show that cryptocurrency prices will always be more risky than any economic model that you use to describe them. Okay, how do I model Elon Musk, for example? Also, for cryptocurrency markets, there's this danger that prices might collapse completely. So what we're trying to cover here is a kind of black swan way of thinking. So when you look at the current coronavirus crisis, for instance, and the sorts of collective failures of the imagination that have affected all of us, I think this black swan way of thinking is an important thing to try and be aware of, even if there aren't necessarily any easy answers.